Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Winging It F1 podcast. This is our first part of our 2021 F1 season review. I'm joined by two people who didn't get punched in the face by Tyson Fury on Saturday. It's Freddie Coates and Adam Dickinson. How are you both? Did you miss me on the last episode, yes or no?
Yes, we did miss you on the last episode.
Yeah. Don't say Adam.
I just want to point out on your introduction to us, I feel very bad for Chisora. That match should have been ended much earlier. But anyway,
we did get 4 million quid.
yeah, and probably brain damage.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, like goodness me. But anyway, other than that lovely image for the start of the podcast, I'm doing very well. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to my sponsors and so on.
Yes, I didn't miss you. It's quite nice to just talk to Freddie sometimes. So
it is calmer. It's less heated
than
when you two are up against each other in a ring.
In a ring. That'll happen. Me and Adam boxing match one day. Imagine.
I have a cage fight at the Kentagon at Brands Hatch.
I mean, you are the one who would organise that, so it's on you, really. It's not.
Yeah, we yes.
Moving on, we're talking about our top 5 drivers of the year in this first part because, well, obviously number 1 and arguably number 2 is quite simple. Below that is quite difficult. Let's start with number 1 then. Max Verstappen as number 1.
Oh, that's mean.
I mean, we're doing most underrated later, so he might come into that.
Nigel, we were talking before this podcast about whether we do a worst ranking of a few drivers, and I just said, no, I don't want to be mean. And he's just gone straight in there by dunking on Lance Stroll.
Well, now we've pressed record. I've changed.
Verstappen, he's a sensible person, to be fair.
Yeah.
Verstappen, I mean, we talk about him pretty much after every race because he wins most of them. 15 race wins this year, set new records, of course. I mean, what else is there to say that we haven't said before, Freddie?
Well, I think he's walked the championship and walked a championship that really was one he could potentially not have been able to walk based on other factors, such as for a dominant season, it was never really that dominant. It was Max Verstappen who was dominant, but qualifying wasn't dominant at all. A lot of the races were very open, I'd say. And it's just he gave that extra little spark that worked, and it was very, very impressive driving. I think sometimes it was a little bit Max, let's say. You look at all the sort of what should be realistically quite an easy storyline for him, a narrative of just diligent performance, doing very well, very happy. There's still room for controversies and things to get under everyone else's collars and stuff like that, and that's just, it seems to be the brush that you have to paint the Max Verstappen story with, which is consistently footnoted. But you can't drive that perfectly for the majority of the races of a season without being an excellent driver and being deserved to be ranked number 1 in the Winging It F1 top 5 drivers of the year rankings.
There's no trophy for this or anything, unless either of you want to contribute. But I'm out of that. So yeah, I think we're talking about most underrated drivers after this, and I'd always be tempted to put Verstappen in that conversation because I do think people just don't appreciate, like Freddie said, just how much he has contributed to the dominance of it. So just that really. I think again, like I said this after Brazil, there were his kind of reaction to after Abu Dhabi and Brazil, kind of his reaction to what happened there, and obviously what happened in Brazil, I think betrayed maybe is a bit disappointing. I don't know. I thought he had kind of moved beyond that, but it felt like a bit of a return mentally to some of his former years in F1. But in terms of on the track, A, that was 1 or 2 race weekends, and B, in terms of his on-track efforts, then it was pretty flawless. So yeah.
I see it similar to Hamilton in 2018, where there should have been a much bigger title fight, but there wasn't because the driver made the difference. But I'd say what was better than Hamilton in 2018 is I think Verstappen made less mistakes, and for me, he got absolutely no weaknesses, and he hasn't had a bad weekend in terms of performance, like say qualifying and the race. where he's been off the pace compared to his teammate. I'd say I'm going to go as far as ever in F1. I can't obviously remember Toro Rosso that well in 2015, but I can't remember any race weekend where he's been like off the pace.
2018 Red Bull weren't
But
necessary.
I thought on raw pace, he was right. He just made silly mistakes like spins in Australia and China and that thing. But on raw pace, he's always there, and that to me is ridiculous. Even Hamilton, he has 2 or 3 weekends a year, say like Russia or in Austria or like the first race of the season, where he's just not quite there compared to Bottas or Russell this year. But Verstappen, I can't remember that ever happening, and that is just mad to me.
Yeah,
So,
very good.
Yeah, so
it's, there are obviously races where there are mitigating factors that threw him off, like Singapore, for instance, and this year. But realistically, I think is that a one-off? I mean, Silverstone was a bit difficult, but that was damage, wasn't it, to his floor?
Yeah, Silverstone he would have won without that damage. And Singapore, if it wasn't for the team making the wrong call in qualifying, he would have been on pole, probably would have won the race. And even Monaco as well. Like, okay, we know could have been a bit controversial now, but he wasn't exactly like off the pace. He was just stuck in that 3-4 car train, really.
Yeah.
So in
but
terms of raw
Monaco,
pace,
you can argue the other drivers were on the pace.
Yeah.
I would suggest perhaps Hungary was a weird weekend. He still won it, but he spun on his way to the win. The qualifying was odd, and it wasn't clean. And I think if the Ferrari didn't put hard tires on, that wouldn't have been, that spin would have been very costly, and he was lucky it wasn't. There are elements of that, but we're drilling into minutiae here because in the grand scheme of it, he won 15 out of 22 races, and that's very, very good.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Just quickly, what do you think his best drive was this year? Obviously, it's very. I've put you on. We didn't talk about this before. I probably should have brought it up. But it's just coming to my head now.
No, I think it's easy.
Spa. Adam?
Just the fact that he won that race in a third of the race after starting wherever he was, 14th, 13th on the grid, and just was at ease with supreme pace. That just, when you look at that, you think it's everyone's, just letting him through and just deliberately driving at 5% while he's driving at 90%, but he was driving at 5% while everyone else was driving flat out, and he was still wiping the floor.
Yeah, I probably agree. I mean, it's like there's been a lot of there's kind of been a lot that you just don't think about. I mean, like, I don't know, like Abu Dhabi, you just cleared off and that was that. Like, it's kind of, but yeah, in terms of like notable performances, like Spa's probably the top there.
Yeah, I think
shout out for Suzuka and Saudi Arabia as well.
I was thinking Saudi Arabia as well as kind of, that really set the tone. Especially after what had gone wrong in Bahrain, that really set the tone for the season. So yeah, that'll probably be the one to throw in second.
Yeah, and considering it was so close to the previous year, it really sort of did wonders for Max's racing, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, for me, I think it's Canada. I think his qualifying performance in the wet was fastest in Q1, Q2, Q3, and then in the race he was challenged by Sainz. I know some people feel Sainz was never going to win, but I think Ferrari had the fastest car that day, and Verstappen yet again made the difference. Came under pressure at the end after the safety car, and held Sainz off as well. So for me, I think Canada and Spa and top two. So yeah, number 2 then. I have gone for Charles Leclerc. I think Adam has as well. Adam, your case for Leclerc?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of one of those, like, if you look at how he started the season and how he went out in his first like real chance to challenge for Ferrari, and let's not forget that he's not been in that Ferrari for that long, and he's not been in F1 for that long in the grand scheme of things, and he's there challenging. I think he's had the beating of Sainz for most of the season, and I think he was let down. He had a few errors, but kind of also let down by Ferrari, and I think that I think he felt like he needed to do everything, and if he had a functioning team, I don't think he makes all of those errors because he's not kind of having to bring everything into account. He can just run his race. So yeah, obviously second in the championship, maybe laboured it a bit more than he might have against Perez, but still second in the championship when Red Bull clearly had, the fastest car for the second half of the season. It's hopefully something to build on for next year, but still a very, very good showing this season.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think, yes, he had those mistakes in Imola and France, which cost him points, especially Paul Ricard. But 2 mistakes over 22 races when you're in your first title fight, I think for most drivers, rather than Verstappen and Hamilton, maybe, that is still an excellent season. So I think Leclerc for me is comfortably number 2. Some of his performances as well have been sensational. I mean, his win in Bahrain at the start of the year was just brilliant. Like, it was pretty much a flawless weekend. And I agree on the point that if he was at a different team, he wouldn't have had to, let's say, overdrive a bit.
Yeah,
I'd say. I think he's overdrove a few times, and that's cost him, especially in the second half of the season when Sainz was beating him at times as well. So for me, Leclerc is number 2, but I believe Freddie might have a different answer.
Yeah, I'm ranking those slight mistakes probably a bit higher than you because I don't think they're very slight. I do think that the France crash was incredibly costly to just any mentality for the team and for him going forward. You could argue that Verstappen had such a lead there, but I think the lead he had was closed in the year before by Hamilton at a similar point in the season. So I do think that championship could have gone 2 ways at that point. It could have gone to Leclerc or to Verstappen, and it went completely to Verstappen because of Leclerc. And I think, I think despite, like you say, all the other reasons that are fantastic, like, yeah, he was the faster driver. His pace at Silverstone, for instance, was mad. And just the fact that he didn't win that was just not on him at all. And you look at other races that were just brilliant, like Australia was one of the drives of the season for a race winner. And that being said, in the context of Leclerc's season, he had costly errors. So I'm marking him down to 3rd and bringing up to 2nd a driver I think just performed just under the radar fantastically, but not under the radar as well, because it was just also just so fantastic. He's the only non-Big Six to get onto the podium, and that's Lando Norris, who just I'm hard pushed to think of much negativity to say about his season. He's once again just been excellent behind the wheel of a weird car, and that the fact that team was fighting for 4th place in the Constructors' Championship is majorly because of him, and he's a ridiculous best of the rest in the drivers' standings. And you look at that and you think, oh, McLaren's a clear sort of 4th place car, but it wasn't at all. But Lando Norris's performance was. So I think that stands out.
I'm interested when you say that you think the championship could have gone 2 ways at France, either to Leclerc or Verstappen. Like, what do you think?
I mean more to Leclerc continuing in the fight. Rather, I don't think it would have been won there. I don't think Verstappen would have been way behind. I do think that was where the championship was lost, is what I'm trying to say with that.
I think, I don't know. I think in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't, like, maybe Verstappen would have had to wait another week to win it. I don't think it kind of makes that much difference in the grand scheme of things. But I do think that your Norris argument is very strong, and I'm very tempted to defect to the Norris side.
I think Norris made a couple of mistakes as well. I'm just trying to remember them, which is bad to explain. But I'm sure he has made was it Brazil? What did he do in Brazil? What happened in Brazil? Something happened in Brazil. I can't remember.
He did. There was the Leclerc crash.
Yeah, there's like tiny mistakes like that, and he's probably made a couple which I've either forgotten about or we haven't seen that haven't been in the spotlight because he's been in the midfield.
I do think the Leclerc understeer tap isn't as big as an unforced error like Charles Leclerc did. And then Brazil, he retired with a gearbox problem or something like that. He just had mechanical problems in the end. But his pace in the first place to put him up there fighting Leclerc is laudable.
I think I would.
He was ill as well, so I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think I will switch out. I think especially the Constructors' Championship point. I really don't think McLaren should have been able to fight that. I think part of that is kind of down to some Alpine mistakes and reliability failures and stuff like that. And McLaren developed very well as the season went on. But having said all of that, there's no way they should have been really there, and Norris kind of single-handedly dragged them to that. So yeah, I think I will put Norris second ahead of Leclerc.
I'm tempted. It's just difficult for me to put someone who's not fighting for the wins or hasn't fought for the wins all year. So the pressure hasn't been the same. So to me, it's a bit less impressive just because of that. And it's not his fault, of course. But I feel for any driver, it is hard if they're in the midfield.
But then the way they cope under the pressure can work both ways, and Leclerc coping under the pressure results in costly mistakes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Kind of the trade to me, it kind of equalizes where the pressure is traded off by making two. I mean, especially France being a massive mistake. Yeah, that kind of nullifies that. I was kind of off the same boat, but I do think it kind of nullifies that.
So
it's very difficult because they you look at the pace and the performance of both drivers, and there are some moments like Leclerc's pole position rate just churning them out is excellent, but then the conversion, obviously, you do have to hand some of that to Leclerc. So
not
all of it, obviously, not all of it. Like he didn't break down his engine in Barcelona, but
he won
Azerbaijan.
France, so
he won one race during or since the European season started at Imola. It was a kind of absolutely massive cliff dive from him winning two out of the first three to only winning one for the rest of the season. Like you could, if you said that to me after Australia, I just wouldn't have believed you.
Well, your name of our Australia podcast was Leclerc versus the World, and the World won.
What I'd say is even like without those errors that he made, if you say he didn't make those errors, he would only have like three. You'd have like 3 or 4 wins maybe, which you'd still be surprised by, because most of the errors were not his fault. That would be much. So I guess the difference in our opinions are, for me, it's more on Ferrari, whereas you guys put a little bit more on.
I'm not basing the driver on Ferrari. I'm not basing the driver's ranking based on the fact that Ferrari put the wrong tyres on in Hungary. Like that.
I mean, on the flip side, if Norris was in the Ferrari car, he would have been in a car capable of challenging for wins and fighting at the front. Whereas that's something you're counting
this is
against
getting
him.
Too murky now.
Well, no, but I just mean like you kind of, counting a team against him, but then like, you're saying that you can't give it to him because he wasn't fighting at the front, whereas like no one could have in that McLaren. So
and
anyway,
it gets too murky. But I do think Norris is the driver that a team would look for rather than Leclerc if they were hiring. If you're Mercedes, I think they'd hire Norris over Leclerc.
Yeah. Okay. So Freddie and Adam have gone Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc. I've gone Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris. Number 4, we kind of mentioned it once in the planning, but I forgot. So we don't really know who each of us has gone for. I'm going to come to Freddie first. Who is your number 4 driver of 2022?
Lewis Hamilton. Because I just think the way he matured into that car and matured into that season was very impressive. Purely on pace, because I do think he made some errors. You look at the Spa collision with Alonso, and that was his fault and things like that. But you'll also look at the record of qualifying from wherever it is, Canada to, I think, realistically to
season.
Mexico, really. He out-qualified George Russell, can just hand over fist. And that there wasn't any visible drop-off in George's performance. It was a visible rise in Lewis's throughout the year. And I think to come back from the way he did after 2021 and to sort of perform in F1 again, and he was fighting for the win in USA. He was the sort of lead fight in Mexico, and it just went very well for him, I think, despite obvious not goods. Just that performance against Russell in the end won me over, because Russell is very good.
What I would say to that is, now before I say who I've got as 4 to 7 or 8 is really, really close. But for 4, you're going to hate me for this. I'm going for Fernando Alonso.
I'm not. I knew you were going for Fernando Alonso because I know you. You just want to be Andrew Benson.
That's a very nice compliment. That
Yeah, actually, I would want to be Andrew Benson.
Good on him. I just think now I know he goes on about every race being his best race and all that, but I generally think this is one of his best seasons. I think he's had an excellent season. The championship standings don't show that Alonso has been better than Ocon, which is obviously, well, not obviously, it is the case. Even though he's finished behind, he's had so many points lost through engine problems and that kind of thing, or bad luck, bad strategy. And I just feel I just think he's been better than both Mercedes drivers. I think he's made less mistakes. I just think he's been more impressive for me by like a tiny bit. I think the mistakes is what makes the difference to both Hamilton and Russell for me with Alonso. So that'd be my argument. Yeah.
He has performed very well. He has performed very well.
Who have you got in fourth, Adam?
I've got Hamilton. I think it's kind of similar. They may be unlucky not to have more kind of headline results. I think Hamilton could have got a win on a couple of occasions and it didn't come round for him. But I think maybe Hamilton's arc has been a bit more. There's been kind of more to it where he came into the season and it was kind of new territory for him up against Russell, and he has just like really grown. He was good at the start, but he's just like grown and really I think got everything out of Mercedes apart from the win. So I just kind of think maybe he did a bit more. If you're comparing his start of the season to the end of the season, I think both were very good, but you can definitely see that trajectory going upwards across the season, whereas Alonso didn't have that.
Yeah, you could say that that's because Alonso sort of hit the ground running. Like he should, as much as we can say he should have got on the front row or very high in Australia, it's a hard one to sort of determine if a hydraulics issue in a gearbox means you crash. That's it's an interesting one, but was it a gearbox issue or did he crash? We don't really know. But like he had the pace to be in that conversation, and Canada qualifying as well was excellent and definitely one of the best moments of the season. But then again, like you look at other moments when Austria, Esteban Ocon was just way ahead. Suzuka Ocon as well, but
that's because in the sprint Alonso started last, didn't he? Because they forgot.
Yeah, but he qualified behind Ocon anyway for the sprint.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
and I mean, but they're kind of. It's a difficult one to rank him on because Ocon is also an excellent driver, and I've got Ocon in my top. If we're going around with this in my top 7 anyway.
20.
It goes like
four-way tie for fifth place.
They both perform fantastic. Yeah, basically it is a 3-way tie for 5th place with Russell, Alonso, and Ocon for me. Like I'm still deciding on that.
I think as well, like you can. I mean, we talked in our mid-season review rating, and I think I kind of underrated Hamilton. That was the harshest on him out of all of us, but he did. I think you can tie Mercedes' progression and George Russell's win in Brazil to kind of the work that he did developing the car and running kind of different setups early on and really just putting his all into figuring out how to make that car go and how to make it race win worthy alongside the rest of the Mercedes team. It wasn't obviously a one-man band, but I think that's maybe what I mean in terms of the arc. I think he really, outside of just his performances, I think he really drove the team on to be the team that it was at the penultimate race of the season and kind of in the run-in at the end of the season.
All right, I'm going to drop Alonso to 5th.
Hey!
I would say that you can make an argument against Alonso in that kind of vein for the way he sort of drove a wedge in the team midway through the season and things like that. And you look at this overspill around after Brazil and going into Abu Dhabi and now after Abu Dhabi, lots of very just random stuff in the press that's very open and candid about him saying, I can't wait to leave this team, and Ocon saying, I'm not really happy he's gone and things like that. And it does just play on your mind a touch that's not amazing and kind of help the performance of where they are in the team. But also, you could also say they've got 4th in the championship, and that's very good. And you got to hand that to him.
I put more of that on Alpine, I think.
Right? Yeah, fair enough.
But I'll drop Alonso down to 5th. But I'm not going to have Hamilton in fourth. I'm going to say Russell's in fourth. I'm actually surprised you've both put Hamilton just ahead of, obviously by a tiny bit, but ahead of
honestly, yeah,
Russell.
a point of a decimal.
Yeah, but for me, I think Russell gets it on the moment. I think pole position and the win, and that's what sport's about, being first. I think on the moment, Russell was there to take it, and Hamilton wasn't. And I obviously, I think I've been saying that Hamilton, like Freddie said, since Canada probably has been slightly the better driver overall. But I think Russell's just been so impressive, and I didn't expect him to be this good for his first season at Mercedes. Yes, he's had, let's say, the Mercedes training, like the perfect run to the seat, being at Williams and watching over Hamilton's back for 5 years and that kind of thing. But to still deliver, to get a pole, to get a win, to beat Hamilton at like 50% of the races or so, that is impressive. And I think that just edges it over Hamilton for me, although I still think Hamilton's had a very good season as well.
Oh, yeah.
Russell's fourth for me.
He hit the ground running impressively, didn't he? And the sort of the consistency of Russell is amazing and frankly brilliant for a driver stepping up to that role. Yes, we knew he could do it. Yes, we knew he was fantastic in Sakir in 2020, and we knew how much he wiped the floor with Kubica and Latifi. Kubica particularly a very canny teammate, and he was a rookie. And so we knew he was fast and he was good, but to translate that so readily into the senior team is very impressive.
Yeah. I have Russell fifth for, again, like it's close between Hamilton and Alonso, but there is space there, and there's space there for me to put Russell in. I think he has. The reason I put Hamilton ahead is, just like, I think, he did just, really come into it from really Canada onwards. From Canada onwards, Russell finished in races they both finished. Russell finished ahead of him 3 times, and one of those was the win. So, I see where you're coming from with the moment, but I just think Hamilton there is a definite edge there, and I think Hamilton had it over kind of a large bulk of the season. But in terms of Russell, it's still absolutely fantastic how he just got into the seat and went up against one of, if not the best to ever do it, and was competitive and won a race and finished ahead of him in the championship, and came into a team that was Hamilton's team. Even though Russell was, has obviously been in the Mercedes program, then it's been a team that Hamilton has dominated and been the dominating figure in. So for him to come out of that with a win and just have the season that he had was spectacular. So it's a very, as we said, it's very close between all of them. But I think Russell definitely deserves a place in the top 5, just again for that kind of arc of the questions coming into the season, and he answered all of them.
I agree. Russell's my 5, but realistically it's a joint 4th with Hamilton, and then Alonso's 5th, so it's top 6. But because
how it works,
it is how it was maths.
Not maths.
We've famously
that
bend physics to make cars go fast. I'm bending physics to rank drivers. But his racecraft just immediately was excellent. You look at the battle he had in Spain, brilliant stuff. You look at just the way he just cleared off in the sprint in Sao Paulo and the race, brilliant stuff, really impressive.
Last thing I'd say on the Mercedes thing is, I do think Hamilton has had a lot more bad luck, especially with safety cars and that kind of thing, and that might have.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but he has, and I think I've said that throughout the season as well. And I still think Hamilton is the better driver, but this year, Russell is slightly better, if that makes sense. So Hamilton's the better driver, but this year, Russell just about.
It was a bit like Sainz Leclerc last season.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, but I think Mercedes have got a fantastic driver to pass the baton on to as well, because there is always the eternal question of this really old for a driver in your team. You're still there, but you do have to think about the future, and Mercedes is future proofed for a long time with George Russell.
Absolutely. Last thing we're going to touch on in this little episode, it's not little, it's about 45 minutes in this episode, is most underrated driver. It can be someone we've mentioned, it can be someone who we've not mentioned. Adam, who have you gone for?
I mean, it's a bit of a difficult one. I'm not, to be interesting, that I'm not going to go for someone that we've mentioned before.
So you're not going to go with what you actually think is what you're saying.
I'm not going to consider. I'm not going. It's
You
you
thought
know,
you
I'm
said
not
Max
going to.
Verstappen.
I don't kind of. Yeah, I don't know. It's just easier to not consider. It's easier to wipe out 5 drivers than what's a difficult one anyway. I think Albon is well rated. I think he's had a fantastic season. He's kind of, maybe, there's been a lot of great drives this season, but he was kind of unlucky, maybe not to be mentioned at all in our top 5. But I think, he was well rated in the season. So I'd maybe say Vettel, because I do think he had a much better swan song than people appreciate, and especially coming on towards the end of the season, then he really came on strong. So I don't think that you can have the world champion be underrated overall, because he is still world champion.
We all ranked him number 1.
Yeah, that's
the definition of rating.
It's like how much kind of further up can you go in their rating? So yeah, for that reason, I'm going to say Vettel. I just think he had a much better running. I think people did start to appreciate him in his very last few races, but I really think he was stronger from a lot earlier in the season.
Yeah, Freddie?
It is a really hard one, because I think both the drivers that Adam just said, I would have put sort of 9 or 10 in a top 10 list, I reckon.
Yeah.
But completely well deserved to be there. And I think Adam's completely right. Vettel's sort of shackle-free races after the summer break were brilliant. Suzuka, Austin, the fact that he got to Q3 in Abu Dhabi was vintage Vettel, and was a performance that proved why he won championships. Obviously, those performances were fewer and far between, but they were there. But it's a tricky one. Underrated. I'm treating it more as a shout out, I guess.
Yes.
Because I feel like we've rated everyone pretty well throughout the year. I don't think there's anyone who has gone under the radar.
I can tell you mine if you want.
Yeah, I am sort of leaning towards the Alfa Romeo drivers, but for different points of the year.
Okay.
Now, I think Bottas's first half of the year was unbelievable. I thought it was brilliant to go into a new team and to hit the ground running like that so well, and to essentially guarantee that team 6th in the constructors is brilliant. And then I think the way Joe then responded to that by being an equal for the second half of the season is also excellent. So I'm sort of giving it to the Alfa Romeo team.
Just to leave everyone in suspense for Nigel's a bit longer, then I do think it's been a bit of a weird season where there's been pairs of drivers have done a lot better. It felt like in previous seasons it was kind of quite easy to do a top 10, because a lot of teams there was a dominant driver and not. Whereas really this season there's been Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren, I'd say. Oh, and then Williams in that bucket. So I guess that is nearly hot, but yeah, I think there was just a really standout driver and a not standout driver in the teams. Whereas this year it's not. There's been both Alpines have been strong. Obviously, both Mercedes, both AlphaTauris have been kind of around the same level, I'd say. So it's kind of not been where it's been in previous seasons, where it has kind of been easier to just pick a team leader for a lot of the teams.
I'm going to go with someone who I think should still be on the grid next year. It's Mick Schumacher. I think he has made. Yes, he's had 2 big crashes, of course, and that has ultimately potentially cost him his seat. But I do think a lot of people didn't see how close he was, or even ahead of Magnussen in the second half of the season. And I really don't think he should have lost out to Hulkenberg. I'd say, to link to Adam's point, the quality of the grid is very high, and I can't help but feel if this was 3 or 4 years ago, Schumacher would still keep his seat. It's just the way that things have happened, he's not. And I think at a different team as well, I'd love to see him not at Haas, because I don't believe that Haas have let's say, the right mentality with F1, let's say, in terms of the management. So I think Schumacher would do very well at a different team, and even at Haas, I still think he's done quite well and should have kept his seat. So he's my underrated driver.
That is some, yeah. I mean, I think the Haas thing does play into why I thought he should lose his seat, because it kind of just didn't seem a good match. But I think, it's a difficult one for him, because he's been evaluated as a second-year driver, but he said himself, he kind of feels almost like a rookie driver, seeing as he was with Mazepin and Haas was so uncompetitive last year. So it's, it's a bit of a difficult one with how he's been evaluated, but it is the way of the world. So There we go. It's F1.
Yeah, I would just say on Mick, and there are just points where he seemed like you think, oh, that was really good, and then next week not really that good, and there didn't seem to be much sort of correlation between his season, if that makes sense. And it was just like he can do it, but he's also not doing it, and it just seems to be a bit kind of random rather than stringing it together. And I think had that been able to sort of be, Adam talked about the arc of Hamilton's season. The arc of Mick's season had some good bits, had some bad bits, and they were sort of scattered around. And there wasn't really a connection there, which you can sort of easily pinpoint. Apart from, it's just seemingly random. And then things like the crash after FP1 was finished in Suzuka and things like that, you just kind of look and just go, Mick. And it's hard. It's a hard one because I think his pace was very good, but then it's the second year factor and things like that, and his pace sometimes wasn't very good.
I think he should have got more than 2 points finishes as well in that Haas.
Yeah, Miami was on the cards, wasn't it? And Bahrain.
I think that's the strategy team. For me, the strategy team, going Tassie, they have let both drivers down. Schumacher in particular. I think some of Schumacher's like, if you just look at Wikipedia and see his results or whatever, you'll say, oh, he's had a bad race, but he's not. He was close to the point or could have been in the points. It's just for some reason they decided to pit him and put him out in traffic or whatever. So yeah, for me, I think there has been a trend from like after Monaco onwards that has been up. It just maybe hasn't been up enough, let's say. But yeah,
he'll be flitting around the paddock. I do think it'll be interesting to see, depending on some of the rookies next year. It'll be interesting to see if he crops up again. I think and he should have definitely been having a standby contract with Williams, but obviously they've gone for their academy with Logan Sargent. But
it's also but yeah, look at his teammate this season. You never know what happens in F1, and something can come up at the last minute. So out of where you least expected it, and yeah, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for him to get that kind of divorce from Haas.
Yeah. So there we go. There's our top 5 drivers and our underrated driver of the year. Let us know your top 5 drivers. I don't know why I'm saying that because no one ever says anything, but I am anyway on Twitter at Winging It F1, at Nigel C. General, at Freddie Coates 1999, at Adam Dickinson 01. We will be back for part 2 to talk about races and teams and moments and F1. And our personal, we'll be back next time.
2023.
See you soon.
2023. Yes, goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.